Hey, what's up guys? Today in this video, I'm going to walk you through some of the things which are happening in the very famous Laravel's Fortify package. Now this is a Laravel Jetstream clean installation, and what Jetstream does is uses Fortify as the headless authentication mechanism. There are a lot of things apart from authentication. To be very frank, it gives you user registration, login, teams, two-factor authentication, so many things, right? And the entire headless logic, which means it doesn't give you any view level thing, everything is there in Fortify. And Jetstream is a package, a UI package, front-end scaffolding, which uses Fortify to do those things. Now the question may come in how things are happening in Fortify, and a very common question which I have seen on forums is how do I customize the registration of Fortify? So let's try and first address a very simple problem, which is how do you customize Laravel Fortify registration process? So inside VS Code, if I go to my apps folder inside actions and then Fortify, can you see there is something called as create new user? Okay. This action implements creates new user interface. And then there is this create method where we first do the validation and then we do user create. That's fine. But then my thing is we do need to go inside and see what is happening, right? So why don't we start digging deep into it and understand what the package exactly is trying to do. So let's go inside our vendors folder, Laravel Fortify. Now inside it, if we go inside the HTTP folder, controllers, we will see something called as registered user controller. This is where the request is getting handled. There's a store method. Can you see the store method is injecting the request object, which is quite obvious because we do need the request, the post request, which is coming after filling the form, right? And for those of you who don't know how the thing works, this is the form. I have name, email, password, confirm password, right? If you get that request, what is happening in this particular case? An event is raised. Why this event is raised? I'll explain you. If you go inside your app folder, go inside providers and event service provider, you will see there is an event called registered, and to that there is a handler, send email verification notification, which means if you want to do something post registration of a user, for example, run some other kinds of notification or maybe send an email to the admin, whatever it is, right? You can hook up that class over here. So whenever this event is fired, that class, if it has a handle method, will be called, and the handle method will be called, and whatever is your logic will get executed. That's the reason when this registration is happening using Fortify, it is ensured that the event is raised. Now inside the event, what is passed is $user. Okay, that's quite simple. The create method is called where request all is sent. Now this is something which is a piece of code which we need to deep dive to really understand what is happening, because inside the construct, inside the controller, the code is quite simple. As you can see, we raised an event, then there is this guard login, and then there's this return of response. So before we go into the create new user, let's quickly look at what is happening over here. So this guard, how is this property available to this class? If we go over here, we can see there is something called stateful guard that is injected to this controller, okay, and that is assigned to this guard, and that's why that function, this guard login, is available. Now if we go inside this interface, we will see there are certain functions which are required, and one of them is login. It expects authenticable user, which is exactly what we will ideally get when the create method is called. Okay, that is quite easy to understand. But then how do we know which implementation is working? Well, that's quite simple. The first place which you should look for whenever these kinds of packages are being checked, right, is go inside its service provider. So what I will do is Fortify service provider, and I will look for, I shouldn't have closed that, but that's fine. Let me go to the constructor again, stateful guard, and try to search for it. It is here. It's a contract, fine. And can you see we are binding the stateful guard with a closure which is sending the auth guard with this particular field. So that means fortify.guard is what is acting as the implementation. Okay, let's move on. Once the login happens, we are returning an instance of a response class. So again, register response is, as you can see, it's an interface which extends responsible. Now that means I'll need to again go back to my Fortify service provider and see what is being binded to this class. Okay, so it is binded to a singleton which is register response. Now this should have the implementation. Let's open that class, and it does. So it has this toResponse function. So if you're not aware, any response class should implement this contract, and it should have, because this response contract is extending responsible, it expects this function. Okay, so let's close these things. Important thing here to understand is when the controller is done with everything, when it is returning something, it is returning an instance of register response, which we saw over here is binded to this contract, right? If we go over here, this is the logic that we have. Request, if it's a want JSON kind of a thing, then we pass an empty 201 success code, empty data, and status code is 201. But if it is a web request, okay, if it is what is that? If it is not an application JSON, right? Then what is going to happen is it will redirect either to the intended URL or the redirects route. Okay, Fortify redirects route. This is something, which if you want to see what is happening is there is a class inside the Fortify package where this is coming from. Okay, so it is taking those routes into picture. Fair enough. We now know what is generally happening inside the controller. Okay, event got raised, user is created, then the user is logged in, and then we pass it over here. But then we still don't know where the create logic is written. Obviously, there's one thing, which is there is an action which is getting triggered. Okay, and that action has the business logic. But then how do we know? Because creates new user is still an interface. So as I told you, we need to understand what is binded to this interface, or which implementation we are right now looking at. Okay, that's interesting. It doesn't creates new user is not getting binded. Okay, let me see if I can find it somewhere else. It should be there. The best way to look for this is right click on Fortify, find in folder, and see what is happening over here. Okay, that's good. So what I can see is creates new user is getting binded. It's an app singleton, creates new user binds to the callback which is coming. Okay, it is very similar to what we saw over here. No, not here. Right, this callback, right, like how this is binded, this is now a normal bind, but over here what I can see is it's creating a singleton. But this is where the basic thing is happening. So the question is, who is calling this method? Let's see. So here we see that it is not directly passed, but Fortify create user using is being called, which is that Fortify class. I told you, right, there is this Fortify class, and this static function is getting called. To this static function, a callback is passed. So if we go to our service provider, we can see this is passed. Okay, and let's open this up. I don't need this class. Let's open this up, and now I can see create new user, which is inside our app actions Fortify, this class implements creates new user, and that is what is required over here. Okay, sorry. Right, this implementation will then automatically get this. Now, create new user implements creates new user, and I have seen that, I mean, we saw this interface is expecting a create function because that's the function which is getting called when we are injecting that implementation. So dollar creator create function is getting called and an array is passed which is request all. So now everything will start making sense, which is first that input is validated. Okay, validator make the array, the rules, and then we run the validate function. If the validation fails, obviously we'll get a validation error, but if it doesn't, then we are returning the user create, which in itself is a user instance, which is also an authenticable instance. Why? Because as we saw in here, register response, right? This was expecting an, the login function was expecting an authenticable user, right? So that's the reason this function is getting called, $user is created, and that $user is logged in. So we now know that the flow is working in this particular way, which is fine. But then if I want to customize it, obviously, as we saw, create new user inside app actions Fortify is one way of doing thing. But then what if we want to write a package, okay, or do it without changing this particular code? I don't want to touch whatever is here, although we are free to do that because it is inside the app folder, which means whatever is there inside the app folder is there to be modified. But as an alternate, what I can show you is, let's just say we do PHP artisan make provider my provider, something very simple. And then let's just go over here. I see this is the provider that got created. Why don't we create one action, my action.php? Now this class ideally will need to implement creates new user, because if you see Fortify create new user also implements creates new user, right? So why don't we do that? Okay, and now it will say that I need to implement the create method, which will get array input. We will dump whatever is coming and we'll do dd from my service provider. So what I have done is I have an implementation of creating a new user, which is really not doing anything per se. It just takes the inputs and dumps it, and then does a die-dump saying from my service provider. But then I can write anything, what I want. The question is, how do I tell Laravel that this is the new implementation? Because if you remember, the mapping of create user using is happening over here. This is my Fortify service provider. So how do I change that? Now this is the beauty of the amazing service provider mechanism, and I like how the Laravel team has allowed us to extend it in multiple ways. So I created a service provider, which is my provider, right? Which extends service provider, right? It's for a reason. What I can do is just take this code, Fortify create user using. So Fortify create user using, and I'll pass my action. It is not complaining, which ideally means it is fine, because just for the sake of demonstration, if I do something like this, ideally, it should have failed. I think my editor is not able to recognize that. If it was PHP Storm, maybe it would have done that. Anyways, but yeah, that's the case. Now, the only thing is this service provider on boot method is doing this. But then even now, Laravel doesn't know about my own service provider. So the last thing which I'll need to do is go inside app.php, which is inside the config folder. This is something which was quite popular when auto package discovery was not there inside composer JSON. But yes, after that, using this has reduced a lot. I hardly use it unless and until there are very basic configurations required. But yes, now in here, because I have a provider, what I can do is, as you can see, Fortify service provider, Jetstream service provider, all these are done, right? And now if I do something like my provider, so it will override whatever has been done here already, right? Now, if I try to register, shouldn't it show my code? I think it should if I have not made any mistake. Let's see. No, it didn't work. Email has already been taken. That is strange because validation still executed. Reach me 1+1. Let's just see. This is a problem because I can understand that my code is not getting executed. Ideally, the validation shouldn't have triggered. So should I do it inside boot or is it inside register? I'm not sure. It should be inside boot. Let me see. It's inside boot, right? So what is the problem? Is my provider even getting called? Let me refresh, cancel. No, it is not, because app this happened, and now shouldn't I get a die dump over here? I should ideally. For example, if I do something like this, dd2, wow, that's weird. That's really weird. 3. Am I looking at the right code? Because yeah, so far I haven't actually executed the code, but yes, seems to be correct. So srv, now it is breaking. Service provider. Okay, let me get rid of these two things. Again, run. Now it is on 1, which means it is over here. Register, right? So let's get rid of that as well. Okay, I'm still getting a 1. Get rid of that as well. And now the application has started, which is fine. Dump. Oops. Register. Amitav Roy. Okay. So this is clearly wrong code. This is picking up completely from a different application. Why is that happening? This is not the application which I am working with. I know what has happened. My bad. So my application is actually running on 8001 because there is my link code which is running on a different instance. I should have seen that. I didn't realize. So fine. I'll just get to this. Okay, unknown database. Right. I need to create a database. Hold on. So I created this new database quickly, and now if I refresh, let me migrate everything. Now see. Okay. So now we can see that our service provider log is working. Okay, because this came in. Okay. And if I refresh, try to register over here, now I am quite sure this will work. Right. So can you see that this is the array which is coming to my action as array input. We dumped that and then we did a dd, which means now if I comment this out, then automatically what is happening inside Fortify or Jetstream in terms of implementation will start to work. So if I refresh, Tavroy jet@jet.com, password, Not now. And if I come to the database, you can see a user got created. Correct? So that's how the implementation can change. Obviously, there are two ways. The reason I showed you the second one, which is through service provider, is just to give you an idea that although you have an action which you can customize, if in some place you want to change for an implementation which is from a package which doesn't give you an action to modify, then you will be able to do that. So yeah, that's about it, guys. I like to deep dive into the code of many popular packages, understand how they do things. I really like the simplicity of this registration process where it's just 3 lines of code. Things are the separation of concern is done in such a nice way. Plus, the best part is it allows you, it is giving you so much ways to extend things. This is really, really a great example of if you're writing a package, then you should definitely do something like this. So thanks for watching, guys. If you like this video, do click on the thumbs up icon and don't forget to subscribe to my channel.